Yo. In this video, I guess I'll be explaining what emulators are. And so there are two types of emulators. I guess the first one is software emulators, and the second is hardware emulators. And I won't go much into what hardware emulators are since I really don't know. But we could talk about software emulators and what they are. It's essentially software. Uh, it's software that tries to imitate another type of like system or hardware. I'm only familiar with emulators that try to mimic other types of hardware, but there might be other like examples. So why do you need to emulate another type of hardware? Well, we can start with an example like GBA games, Game Boy Advance, like Pokemon. So what this file is essentially like binary that Game Boy Advance or Game Boy system would be able to run, since it understands the instructions within this file. But your modern PC or something wouldn't be able to understand that, so it wouldn't be able to run it. And how code typically runs is you have the source code, and that gets boiled down to assembly, and assembly is essentially like instructions, and those instructions get turned into binary, and binary is what your CPU is able to understand. So different CPU architectures are able to run different binaries. Like not all CPUs can run the same binaries, what I'm trying to say. That's why when you compile something with, like, if you compile C++ code in one computer, it won't be able to run on another computer, since the CPU wouldn't be able to understand the binary that was compiled. So what does that have to do with emulators? Well, darn it. So let's say you have a PC and you want to run like a Pokemon game. Let's say p.gba. So your PC doesn't inherently understand the instructions within this file, since the binary can only be understood by the Game Boy. So that's when you have an emulator, and the software here essentially like imitates the CPU and other components of the Game Boy in like this example. So the CPU would be like a virtual CPU that would read in these instructions, and some hardware, they might have like unique components that have to do with like graphics or like audio, and the way that your emulator takes care of that stuff is through software like OpenGL, and OpenGL will talk to your PC's graphics card. That way, it's essentially able to, mimic a Game Boy Advance or like any other hardware, a Game Boy or any other type of hardware. and yeah, essentially takes in the instructions here, kind of is a middleman between your PC. So it tells your PC the instructions to run, and your PC essentially does that. Like another example would be like if your Game Boy Advance code here, like one of the instructions is to like draw or render a screen with like a little dot in the middle. Your computer wouldn't inherently understand that until your emulator CPU would run it and would actually I don't know if it's a CPU that does it. I just know your emulator will um, will know what the instruction is here to render a screen with the dot in the middle, and then kind of tell your PC to do just that, render a thing with a dot in the middle. Yeah, that's why you're able to play some Pokemon games with like an emulator. Um, yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. Um, yeah. Thank you for watching.